Right now, somewhere in your house, there's a machine running. It's loud. It's eating your electric bill alive. You call it the AC. Your great-grandparents would have called it witchcraft, because they never needed it. Thousands of years ago, in some of the hottest places on Earth, people built something into the ground that kept their homes cool. No compressor. No refrigerant. No power bill. Just dirt, air, and a piece of physics simple enough that a kid could explain it back to you. And at some point in the last 100 years, almost everybody just forgot it existed. So what was it? And why did we throw it away? Stop and think about that for a second. You live in a world with satellites in orbit and a supercomputer in your pocket. And yet on a hot July day in Texas, your main tool for survival is the exact same idea your great-grandfather used. Pump in electricity, blow air over cold metal, hope the bill isn't too bad this month. It works. But it's not smart. It's just brute force with a thermostat attached. There was a time when brute force wasn't an option, because the electricity to power it didn't exist yet. So people had to outthink the problem instead of outspending it. Go back to ancient Persia, modern-day Iran. Summers there could hit well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks straight. No power grid. No relief except shade, water, and whatever you could engineer. So engineers did something genius. They went underground. Here's the trick. Dig down a few feet, and the soil temperature barely moves all year. The surface is baking, but a couple feet down, it's cool and steady. Same reason a basement feels cold in summer. The ground works like a giant thermal battery. Slow to heat up. Slow to cool down. Doesn't care what the weather's doing up top. Persian engineers built entire tunnel networks around this called canons, sometimes stretching for miles, sloped just right so water and air moved on their own, no pumps needed. Air would travel underground, dump its heat into the cool soil, and arrive at your house noticeably colder than what was happening outside. And then they topped it off with something even cooler, tall towers called badgers, wind catchers. Picture a tower poking up from the roof, split into shafts that face every direction, so no matter which way the wind blows, it gets caught. The wind drops down the tower, crosses paths with that cool tunnel air, and gets pushed back up into the rooms, pulling the heat out of the house on its way. A fully passive air conditioner. The only moving part is the wind itself. An Iranian engineer named Mehdi Bahadouri actually studied these systems in the 1970s and ran the numbers. His findings: these wind tower setups could drop the indoor temperature by 18 degrees Fahrenheit or more compared to outside. 18 degrees. In the desert. With zero electricity. And this wasn't a one-off. Half a world away, in Tunisia, families in a town called Matmata carved entire houses straight into hillsides, letting the rock itself regulate the temperature. No mechanical parts at all. Different continents, different centuries, zero contact with each other, same exact idea. When that happens, when cultures with no way of talking to each other land on the same solution, that's usually a sign the solution is just true. The ground doesn't lie about temperature. So here's the real question. If it worked this well for this long, why'd we ditch it? It's not that it stopped working. It's that something more convenient showed up. In the early 1900s, mechanical refrigeration started taking off. Willis Carrier built the first real compressor-based cooling system, and weirdly, it wasn't even for cooling people. It was built to control humidity in a printing plant. It took decades for that tech to shrink down and get cheap enough for regular homes, finally going mainstream in American houses by the 1950s and 60s. And once you could just plug in an AC unit, it offered something passive cooling never could: instant cooling, anywhere, regardless of how your house was built or which way your windows faced. You didn't need a wind tower. You didn't need to dig a tunnel. You just needed an outlet. Convenience one. It almost always does. Humans will pick the option that requires zero thought right now, even if it costs more down the road. Same reason a drive-thru beats meal prep on a Tuesday night. But that convenience came with a hidden price tag. Air conditioning eats a massive amount of electricity, and it eats the most exactly when the grid is already maxed out, during heat waves. Economist Lucas Davis, who studies global AC adoption, points out that cooling is now one of the fastest-growing drivers of electricity demand worldwide, especially as hotter countries get rich enough to afford it. And there's a brutal irony buried in here. The machines we built to escape the heat are part of what's making the planet hotter, which means we need the machines even more. Hotter summers sell more ACs. More ACs pull more power. More power, in a lot of places, means burning more fossil fuel. And that pushes the summers even hotter. Your thermostat is sitting right in the middle of that loop. Meanwhile, the old systems just sit there. Quiet. Doing nothing. Still technically working in some surviving buildings, just waiting for wind and shade. No emissions. No feedback loop. No bill. In the city of Yazd, Iran, a bunch of these wind tower buildings are still standing, and researchers have studied them specifically because they're still cooling rooms, centuries later, using zero energy. Engineers publishing in journals like Building and Environment have pointed to these Canatan windcatcher systems as proof that pre-industrial builders weren't just surviving, they were doing real, calculated thermal engineering. They just didn't have sensors to prove it. They had thousands of years of trial and error instead. Here's the part that hits different. You probably think of your house as a box. If it gets too hot, you don't fix the box, you bring in a machine to fix the problem. The building itself barely has to do any work. Ancient builders didn't get that luxury, so the building had to do the work. Every wall thickness, every window placement, every tunnel dug into the ground was a calculated answer to a question we basically stopped asking. How do you build something that cools itself? That's the real twist here. Ancient people weren't short on technology. Their technology just demanded a different kind of smart, reading wind, sun, and dirt instead of reading a thermostat. You can sit in a freezing cold room right now in a house you understand almost nothing about, in a climate you've never had to think twice about, because a compressor is doing all the thinking for you. That's not necessarily worse. But it's worth noticing. So tonight, when you walk into a cold room and don't even register it, just know there's a tunnel buried somewhere in human history that did the exact same job using nothing but moving air and patient dirt. And it's still down there. Waiting. Doing absolutely nothing, because somewhere along the way, we decided we didn't need it anymore.